All right. Hello, Sean. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself for our viewers?
Sure. My name is Sean Capone. I am a Brooklyn-based digital animation artist. Um, I have been working in the digital art medium for about 25 years. And as you imagine, that's taken me across a broad variety of different aspects of the field. I actually started out working in video games professionally, and then I switched to motion graphics. I've done a little bit of visual effects work in film. And since I moved to New York about 15 years ago, I have centered a practice uh, pretty much exclusively on art, but also specifically moving image-based public art, and also uh, visuals and material for events and concerts and things of that nature.
Wow. Sean, you have so much in your background that we've never discussed before, and I think is fascinating. We could make a whole topic out of that another day, but I want to kind of start with your entry into Supernova. You were embraced within the festival dating back to 2018 when your entry, The Sky Report, was in competition and awarded second place by our esteemed panel of jurors. It was a luminous and thoughtful abstraction that really showed how art can intersect with public screens. And you followed that up in 2019 with something quite the opposite, Origin of the Species, which wowed a select audience at our packed Overdrive adults only animation screening. And it's nice to see there are two sides of Sean within Supernova so far, with both having their own place and context and audience embrace. So in 2020, now you have animations that pull both triggers on display. The first is a commission for Nightlights Denver, and the second, and the introduction of a very scary but irrefutable character in our World on Fire program. So I'd like to just have a little bit of dialogue about both. And let's start with Nightlights Denver. This commission resides within a movement that seems to have money attached, which is always nice, and that you also seem to be attracting in other locations and projects in various ways. So how did your work in public art evolve for you from this deep history?
Well, yeah, as you say, I do actually have a kind of bifurcated art practice. I work, on the one hand, in public art, and on the other hand, making these kind of more character-driven, single-channel animations using motion capture and avatar characters. For Nightlights Denver, it's actually a case where the two are kind of aligned at once, where the two aspects are kind of aligned. So I might talk about both of them simultaneously.
Sure.
But for the history of it, back in 2008, 2009, seemed to be about the time when, it was a couple of years into YouTube changing popular culture, like revolutionarily. And but that was also around the time when things like projectors, flat screen TVs, HD video, had really just become mainstream and accessible, and for the most part inexpensive. And it's only continued to get that way since then.
Sure.
And since living in New York, and being around Times Square and the kind of visual information of a big city, uh, uh, it occurred to me that the moving image, that video, was not just something on a screen, wasn't just a piece of furniture in our living rooms, but it was actually a space. It was actually something architectural, that we could enter and occupy and interact with, and in a public art context, use to connect with other people, and with a shared experience. And that wasn't like, that's not a big revelation, of course, but that was also like kind of globally when there was like a urban screens movement, where curators were looking at the idea of art, art film and art video in a public context that could take over the digital billboards and LED screens, which had become ubiquitous in industrialized society. And of course, Creative Time had been doing that with the Times Square billboards since the 80s with the Midnight Moment. But it had become increasingly ubiquitous in other cities and other places around the world. So that's why I started to do that work. It really was the opportunity to find a space to address that.
Sure.
And to create a more meditative encounter with the mass media and kind of, rewire people's engagement with the information overload that you usually get in spaces like that.
Sure, absolutely. It's New York's Times Square obviously has a big impact all around, and I didn't realize that the Midnight Moment project had been around since the 80s, but I recently was digging into Keith Haring's past through his notebooks and discovered that he was really onto the digital art movement as a result of creating an animation for Times Square. And when I connected with that, I was like, oh yeah, this has actually been around for a long time, but the evolution has been so slow and maybe indeterminate in a lot of ways that we're reaching what I would consider to be some kind of tipping point where there's all kinds of new ways of associating these public experiences and then maybe projects taking them on in different ways. And of course, that's where Denver Digerati started in all of our work. That it makes sense that your intersection with us came about. And the Sky Report to me, it was really beautiful as something that shows what can really happen if you were to try to create a sustained piece that could live in the sky on the side of a building. And of course, in its greatest realization, we'd have it playing all day long, every day, someplace here in Denver. But how do you think about that? Like, where was that piece created with that idea in mind?
The Sky Report.
Yes.
Actually, the Sky Report was developed from not with the intention of it showing outside. I mean, by that time I had developed a kind of aesthetic pattern language, using generative software that could, make these looping abstract patterns, which was an essential part of the entire visual language of the project. Kind of bringing animation into a more painterly place or a more environmental kind of space. But you might have noticed that a lot of this kind of work of mine is very, it's very flat. There's not like there's not camera fly-throughs, there's not like a kind of trompe l'oeil space, 3D space. Yeah, a lot of my work is very planar. I can't seem to get away from that. But the piece was originally kind of designed as more of a backdrop, something that you would see inside as a kind of video mural, but very large. And it was originally created specifically for the Art Prize competition in Michigan, which was something I decided I'd experiment with and see what happened.
What happened?
It was an interesting experience. I'll just say that.
Okay.
But it was presented originally indoors as a large, kind of backdrop mural in this theatrical ballroom space. And over the course of you'll see on my website, there's some documentation of like a local dance troupe who would come by and kind of improvise with the visuals. And, another, like a children's dance troupe came in and did a similar performance. So that was all spontaneous over the course of the festival. You know,
In what way? The you did not
the
know.
organizers of the space had invited these troops to come in just as part of the whole the art prize community, you know, which is very peripatetic. People and different art groups and artists all just walking all around the city, you know, participating in these exhibitions and these kind of social events and stuff like that.
Okay. And did the work stand out within the context of the art prize as something different from what most of the rest of the experiences, the art experiences, might be?
Art prize is very much an attention economy kind of event. And I had contributed to it a little bit late. So I didn't get, you know, artists have to apply and compete for specific spaces. You know, and these spaces range from, you know, the back of a bar to like a full-on museum,
Sure.
and a public space, a lobby, literally anywhere you can put a piece of art in downtown. Wait, what am I? Grand Rapids, right? Uh, where there's something there. So it's a very competitive process, and I'll say that the my sponsor, the Harris Art Building, he was an ambitious guy, and he had this huge, beautiful space with a lot of different things going on. But it was a little further away from the core of downtown, so I didn't really get as many eyeballs on it as I wanted to. But the experience taught me a heck of a lot.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's really great to hear that insight, because I think, you know, people don't always understand what opportunities mean or how they're driven from within the project. But it sounds like, you know, this intersection with additional performers, that maybe lent itself as a pathway towards new possibilities moving forward.
Yeah, and your observation about having the Sky Report actually be on an LED billboard, you know, with the actual sky as a backdrop, is was part of that process of discovery with that particular piece.
Mm.
Because even though it's called the Sky Report, it actually kind of follows a trajectory, in my mind anyway, from, you know, kind of the cosmos to the earthly level of the sky down to the more material plane, you know, which is the final image, which is the most well-known image of the kind of contour landscape in the map, is
Sure.
really not a sky image at all. But what I saw was a kind of, you know, kind of cosmological descent. I'm really into these cosmological stories with these abstract pieces. But the piece is actually showing now, or it will be showing by the time Supernova opens, on the facade of the Pendry Hotel in West Hollywood, which is a new hotel which has been developed, which is literally wrapped around on all sides with LED screens in different sizes. And so I created a kind of custom version of the Sky Report to match all of the various screens which adorn its facade. So in a way, it's kind of like, you know, found a perfect home with, and I can't wait to get there and see the piece with the beautiful LA sunset actually going on behind it with the palm trees and everything.
Wow. I that is just absolutely ecstatic to hear. And what I love about it is just this sense of the evolution of an artwork, you know, starting in one place and evolving into something that to me sounds absolutely spectacular. So that's thanks for sharing that with us. It's
Video art doesn't sell, as we all know. Video art does not sell, but it is infinitely scalable. And um, a piece like that can find, you know, uh, can find a home in a lot of different contexts.
yeah.
And the more site specific pieces, now getting back to the idea of urban screens and architectural installations and stuff like that, where we find ourselves creating pieces specifically for these bizarre resolutions and configurations of LED panels or projection mapping and stuff like that. Those are great, and they add a lot of value to the exhibition space and the event. But from the artist perspective, the piece can only live, for the most part, in that space. And once the event is done, you better hope that you have some good documentation of it, because it's going to be very hard to make it live again.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that I view that as the history of video art. You can't just be happy with it being, a moving image in a format on a screen. It once it's adapted to a particular construct, that experience lives, has a very remote life. And the challenge with video art collectors has always been, how do you have the time and wherewithal to try to make those experiences kept intact? I think that as life in the medium evolves, everybody's always looking to explore new opportunities, new technologies, and the artist sometimes just has to think differently and understand that they're part of that whole evolution. So it sounds to me like you have a really great head on your shoulders about it, and I love the fact that you're able to operate on a level that includes that understanding. Yes.
A head on my shoulders, literally.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring this then around to the Nightlights Denver commission and that project. So I love LED and what LED can facilitate now and what is around the corner. I've always just touting this line that if it's cool now, you haven't seen anything yet, and the world is moving into a place where there's going to be lots of opportunity. But projection mapping is something that also has been taking the forefront in recent years. And this opportunity did arise as a permanent infrastructure, a video mapping infrastructure within the heart of downtown Denver. It's very expensive setup to do something that takes place nightly. And the beauty of it is that the works can reside in a constant rotation and offer opportunities to lots of artists in a particular way. So within the context of Supernova this year, I was very excited that we got to have the chance to commission 10 artists. You were at the top of my list in a lot of ways, because I think your depth within the context of public art, and you've created this ecstatic work called Molecular Clock. So nobody's seen that yet. We may drop a hint of an image prior to the unveiling, but what would you like to tell us about conceiving of this piece?
Okay. Actually, just one quick comment on what you said before about artists and the technical evolution working in this medium. Like I said, I've been working in this medium for quite a long time, but I've really only kind of centered my practice on this kind of work in the last, let's say, decade or so. And I thought about why it took me so long to get back to making art. And it was because that I feel like I really couldn't start making this work until we got to a place completely away from videotape and DVDs, where the work could exist, kind of purely just on the screen or in these contexts, and specifically on a high resolution flat screen. It really wasn't until it became ubiquitous in culture for our TVs to be flat picture frames on the wall, like a painting, as opposed to a big box with a curved bubble screen on it, to really start thinking about how this work could live and what its purpose was. So that's why the work is is kind of interchangeable between seeing it on a flat LED screen, uh, or being projected large on the side of a building.
or
Um,
or showing behind me on a green screen, like I think about that and I go, yeah, the work was never intended for that, but now there's all sorts of ways that the work can be repurposed, and that in essence, the work no longer resides in a physical context at all. It's a file in the cloud.
yeah, but I am old enough, to have been trained in the medium of, specifically in the medium of new media art, of video art. So, one of my, my earliest influences were artists like Namjoon Paik and Tony Oursler, who are video artists working with conventional mediums of videotape and analog video, but who created, these immersive sculptural kind of environments and encounters with video. And they were the pioneers who did this, and who had to work very hard, obviously, to make it happen. We're very spoiled in the sense that I can have a projector literally sitting under my desk, and I can use it to create a 40-foot wide, projection image of my work wherever I can plug it in. So, so just I just want to, I'm not much of a technological determinist, if that's the correct word, but the emergence of my working this way dovetailed absolutely with the, with the kind of corporate takeover of this specific medium in popular culture.
Sure.
LED screens, cheap projectors, stuff like that.
Well, every human being's entry point into the world is at a different point or a different time. And I love this notion that, there's history all around at every moment. It's always changing, and how you understanding it and adapting to it and moving forward with it. What you've just said is some of the most important context I've ever heard. And that's exactly what we're hoping for viewers to get, and particularly the younger viewers, to maybe understand that that they're stepping into something that has a lot of deep traditions, but not as deep as the traditional arts, and that they're all in this swell of motion and movement forward that has its crests and waves, and you never know what's around the corner. So it's really great to hear you frame that in such a way in this context.
Well, the fact that we're making art which is dependent upon corporate kind of, like kind of corporate markets and corporate, global corporate technological processes is really important to like be sensitive to, because ask any media artist who's been working in this field for, several years at least, and they will have had lots of encounters of software that they were reliant upon being discontinued, an operating system no longer having some of the features that they needed to make their previous work.
Yeah.
Whole formats just being completely obsolete. Like you can't even look at SD resolution video on YouTube anymore because of the way it like scales up and looks like garbage. So, it's the constant of migration and always moving forward and trying to keep ahead of those formats and not let your work be exclusively dependent upon the whims of those things that are out of your control is really important to think about if you're a media artist, as opposed to literally, I'd say, any other medium which is pretty much fixed from centuries of, centuries of development and acceptance.
Yeah. Well, it takes a very particular type of person to both understand, accept, and embrace that.
Lunatics.
Lunatics. Well, all artists are lunatics in one way or another, as are curators, because it's not always done for the same purpose as everybody else in life and what they're aiming and striving for. So that's the beauty of it. and that's, you know, what I think we both understand. So, but
Night Lights Denver.
Nightlight
Yes.
Denver, yeah. Tell me, Molecular Clock is the name of your work. It's absolutely spectacular. I did sample 30 seconds of it, and not in its traditional format because I wanted to put it on our very horizontal LED screen. So there's a snippet of it running every single day now throughout the day here in Denver, and but it's intended for the Daniels and Fisher clock tower, which is the most iconic building in downtown. And tell me a little bit about working towards that piece.
Well, the piece was done. Thank you for that, by the way. And the clip of it on the 16th Street screen looks wonderful. Obviously, I had to compose the piece in a horizontal aspect ratio and kind of drop it into a vertical, you know, kind of like pre-comp, just so that I could visualize how the elements were interacting with the windows and the mapping of the architecture and everything. So it ostensibly it's meant to work either horizontally or vertically, but at this wide aspect ratio, kind of panoramic aspect ratio. But you know, I guess I've just done this enough now to where I had the confidence that my instinct and my guesswork about how the piece would look on the building, I could just kind of go for it without doing extensive testing or site visits, which is what I like to do, but obviously that's off the table these days.
Yeah. We're testing it on Monday, just so you know.
Excellent. So all I can say is that it was just all guesswork, and that I'm hoping that it works out the way that I want it to. There is some level of kind of visual overload in the piece, which seems to conflict with my earlier manifesto about creating a retreat from mass media visual overload. But I just felt like that's the place that we were in right now, and with the context of World on Fire, that we were all in a period of retreat, but also dealing with so much, and maybe not actually dealing with much more than we typically have to deal with, but like the things that we had to deal with before the COVID pandemic crisis happened. I guess, like, what did the Joker say in the movie? That was all part of the plan, but now all of this is not part of the plan. And as we kind of retreat further inward, every choice that we make seems much more pregnant with, meaning and with intention. And all of us just have to get deeper in our intentions these days, in our relationships, in the work that we do, and how we choose to go, embrace the day when we wake up in the morning. So Molecular Clock was actually based on visuals that I was developing from a couple of other projects. And the idea came from primarily from the idea that it was the building itself, the site was a clock tower. I don't work didactically, but I try to be inspired by context. And the idea of a clock tower, of a giant timepiece looming over an abandoned city, like abandoned city, not to be too romantic not to romanticize this crisis at all. I want to emphasize that. I'm not trying to be poetic or romantic with these very serious issues that have affected people. But the idea of this giant kind of timepiece looming over the city is a very interesting symbol to me. And I've long been fascinated with just the kind of icon of the hourglass, of this kind of shape, or of kind of like the dual circles intersecting in a kind of infinity symbol. These are symbols that have long been a part of my work. And so the shape of the clock tower itself just lent itself well to creating this kind of infinity hourglass shape of time, not only counting down and passing for us linearly, but being cyclical. of, of kind of ending, and wherever there's an end, there's a new start. And societally, I don't think it can be argued that we are at that point right now, that we are at the end of one thing and the beginning of another. I did an Instagram post on July 4th where I said, let's let July 4th be considered, 2020 be considered America's, second revolution, America's second Independence Day, and the visuals themselves for Molecular Clock. Well, the title itself, Molecular Clock. A molecular clock is a technique, not exactly a science. It's a technique that evolutionary biologists use to trace mutations in DNA across millennia, across periods of millennia. And it can be used to kind of predict where splits happen in evolutionary trees. And so I feel that this is kind of one of those moments, where society is being split, and where mutations in thought, in socio-political reality, are being rewritten right now on our societal DNA. And this new history is not exactly being written entirely by us. This is a moment where we talk about the privileged age of the Anthropocene, meeting, clashing, coming up against what is being called the microbiocene, where we have to, and it's interesting that this happens in the middle of the climate change crisis as well, because we have to get present to the fact real fast that nature does not exactly, there's no guarantee that nature is going to privilege, the Anthropocene, that nature is going to privilege us as the as the dominant organisms on Earth, and that we have to start respecting everything else that is happening around us, even if it's invisible to our perceptions. So that was just really more of the backstory of what was going on in my head, as opposed to the actual content of the piece. But you can see that in the piece, in addition to my usual kind of looping, weird, kind of gestural strokes, there's the introduction of these kind of 3D rendered viruses and microbiological forms in this kind of snow globe aquarium swirl of things that are all, kind of moving about in the piece.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that all with us. That is absolutely riveting. And what I love about this is that it fits within the whole context of the public's experience with art, and particularly within the context of abstraction, the context of a video map piece that has a different format. The public's going to react to it in a way that that you can't control, but what you have put into it and what you've just delivered is something that I think shows just the deep thought and the deep impact of what this means. It's an amazing work, even without seeing it yet on the side of the tower. It's just I think of it as something that aliens from space, if they were looking down and they had their microscopes and they saw this, they would be like, oh my God, this civilization has it figured out. And then they'd get down and be like, what?
Like I said, I really made the piece just kind of based on instinct and but also experience. And my experience shows that audience attentions in a public art context are driven more by kind of narrative action and kind of linear action that's happening across the screen. But this, so this piece in a way is just kind of there's a lot of things happening all at once on different parts of the canvas. So it might require a few viewings to kind of focus in on any one zone of the piece, but it was just what I decided to do as opposed to a more narrative-driven piece, in the hopes that these kind of works are more theatrical in the sense that they work very well when the audience is more immersed, kind of in the zone in which the piece is being projected. Historically, I very much like to do projection pieces from the ground up so that people can deliberately get in the projection stream and have their shadows kind of interact with the work. It's kind of interactivity without having to actually design interactivity, and let people improvise insert their own forms into the artwork. And it's a wonderfully simple form of interaction and engagement that I think is probably going to be not present in this piece, but I wanted to go ahead and do it this way, kind of create it this way anyway.
Sure. Well, so I have not revealed to the other artists or to the public at all who the other artists are that we've commissioned for this project. And I'm going to take the opportunity right now to do that, just because I'm so delighted by the results, and what you're saying right now feeds a lot into determinations that I've made in regards to who I would want to participate, maybe how I might want to see the results play out. It's been a balance of, artists that I think are absolutely up for the challenge versus artists that are sort of new to the field and that I'm just impressed with and want to provide the opportunity. So you might not know all of the artists, but I'm just going to read the list for the first time. Maybe this will be
Yeah.
the first thing we release for people to make that connection. So at the top of my list, besides you, Raquel Myers. She was award winner in 2016 at the first festival.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful artist, beautiful work. Rick Silva and Nicholas Sassoon. I imagine
Yeah.
you're familiar with them. Rick was.
Yeah, they just did the 150 media stream just before I was at the opening of their work in Chicago, right as all this was going down.
Yep, absolutely. Rick nobody would know besides myself, but Rick was our very first test piece for Friday Flash back in 2013.
Oh, wow.
Started the whole ball rolling. Then, of course, there's you. There's Michael Edwards, who is an artist that I discovered a couple years ago. He teaches in Utah. He does abstract animations that are really, really wonderful, just very compelling, and what he's created for this project just, I think, fits perfectly within the sphere of video mapping. Heather Crank is somebody that yeah, you probably are familiar with Heather. She's been a huge fan and supporter of Denver Digerati. She used to live here in Denver years ago, and is somebody that I have an overwhelming feeling of joy every time her name comes into my head. So she's created amazing work. So those are what I consider the five, upper level artists. Siishi Iramajiri, he's sort of in between, because he's an artist that first approached us in 2017 with a work that I just loved. He's out of Japan. So we've given him the opportunity. There's some up and coming artists that were part of the festival last year. Gabriela Iliescu, I hope I'm not butchering her name, but she had a wonderful piece in last year's competition.
Yeah, I remember.
Jenny Jenny's she has a different last name, I believe, but she's in New York along with you, and she's a delightful emerging artist that had a wonderful piece in our Director's Choice program, as did Brian Eng. Another last name. These last three are two-letter last names, and I never know quite how to pronounce them, but Brian is an emerging artist out of California that we featured last year. And then there's Sharon M., who had work alongside you in Overdrive, one of the most spectacular, beautiful works that I've seen. And I just fell in love with her work, and she's been a real sweet person in terms of our dialogue. She's creating a work for this that is not digital, it's hand-drawn animation, and she's pouring her heart and soul into it. And I look at the whole field and I go, this is a dream come true. Whether we get to do it again or not, I don't know, but this is as strong as it gets, and we'll see the results starting next week. So there you go.
Well, it's you know, I felt like I've worked in isolation, jumping from one thing to another for so many years, and it's only been just in the last few years with things like Supernova and Digital Graffiti Festival in Florida and the 150 Media Stream in Chicago, um, which Nick did a piece for most recently. You know, that I've felt like that I'm part of a creative community, and it was kind of inadvertent, you know, because I came to New York to be part of the art world community in New York, and I've, you know, but I feel that like in the art world and the moving image world, the animation world, you know, are still kind of like two different communities and two different people, two different groups of people kind of doing their own thing. And it's been a wonderful ride, just kind of like having this other, you know, world of work and people opened up to me just over these last few years, where I felt like I was starting to get a little jaded.
You and I have talked about this a little bit, and
A little bit.
yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I mean, I feel the same way. Every art scene has its niches, has its complications, has its, you know, people who are elevated for, you know, no good reason or very good reason. I mean, it's a thing that, you know, on one level will always be the same. And as I, you know, had a 15-year history within a physical gallery space, and
Right.
just this desire to support artists, it started to get to me like how you feel like not much changes within that context over time, and that if you really want to open up your world to a much greater universe, much greater potential, that maybe there's a way to do that. I didn't set out for that per se, but what I found through Denver Digerati and particularly Supernova is a way to do that. And part of that is that, you know, just having the background in contemporary art for me has made me understand more like what artists want, and how you might want to treat them, and how those interactions might go. And I always say that the greatest joy of Supernova is the relationships that I'm making with people that half the time I've never met them, and may never meet them. And there's just a different ethos to the whole system in a way. It has the same complications and challenges, but when you just can distill it down to what's meaningful to you and what you want to interact with and embrace, it's very pure and very joyous. And I think we both got to experience a little bit of that in March when I was out in New York prior to the lockdown. That like, you know, I always say, if it ended, if the world ended tomorrow, if the apocalypse is coming, I'm going out with the greatest feelings of where I'm at within this sphere right now. So, but I don't want to think about that too much.
You know, I just wanted to like just, you know, give a little bit of props to Supernova as well. As you know, you build your own community. You know, it's like you build your own audience, you build your own community. There's a lot of different art worlds and a lot of different creative worlds. And as moving image makers, as animators or whatever, you know, we are able to engage other fields and other, you know, kind of zones of creative activity in society. So why wouldn't we, you know? And what, you know, I challenge, you know, most of the artists that you and I, most of the directors and animation artists that you and I both like, you know, have all worked in film, you know, have all done idents for MTV or Adult Swim, you know, done music videos, concert visuals, live visuals, you know, and I feel it's important not to limit ourselves, you know, to kind of just focused on one particular audience in the art world, which maybe necessarily doesn't even really have a lot of patience for video art, for moving image art. Although I've certainly seen that evolve and change over the decades. And Supernova is also different than other large-scale animation festivals in the world. You really embrace stuff that's conceptual. You really embrace stuff that's more experimental, that most other festivals just really wouldn't, you know, kind of have any language, you know, about, you know, or audience with which to support. So that's also really important for me to say.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that I appreciate that. A lot of that goes back to my history at Sundance over, you know, decades ago, and their New Frontiers program was always my favorite. It was the one that nobody bought tickets to. If you were getting shut out of the other films, you still wouldn't go to the New Frontiers program because it was too obscure, but it was always the best work. Beau Travail premiered there, and I'm like, that's the greatest movie of all time in my life in a lot of ways. And I always think back on that and go, there's a place for it. Fighting for it is really tough, and if you can try to frame something around it, then it's really wonderful. So you know, we've been talking for a long time, and this has been a beautiful conversation. We should just end on that note, but I do want to just have you tell us a little bit about your second work that's going to be in Supernova, and it's part of your Avatar Poetics ongoing series. And so why don't you just tell us the name, let us know a little bit about it, and I think it's an incredible piece. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Well, as we mentioned at the start of our conversation, I do have a kind of split practice, one that makes the public work, which we'll just say is more abstract and non-narrative. And I have another body of work, which I call loosely, collectively, Avatar Poetics, which uses facial capture, vocal performance, and 3D animation to make these kind of monologue, you know, kind of philosophical, absurdist single channel videos with talking heads and, you know, animated kind of virtual environments. In a nutshell, the whole thing is really pretty much just comes down to Max Headroom and, you know, growing up and kind of being fascinated with Max Headroom and not really knowing if he was a computer simulation or an actor. You know, back in the 80s, it was a real question.
All started with Max. Holy shit.
Of course it all started with Max. It also, I always say, you know, depending on who's listening, who knows what I'm talking about, I always say my work is a mashup of Max Headroom and Tony Auersler, who took that floating head phantom ghost idea and like made it really uncanny and really creepy.
Yeah.
So I'll just stay with that. But the new piece is, and I'm not actually sure how to pronounce the last name either. It's I hope you can put up a title here in this interview at least. It's you know, Theo Tohuaki, or you can put an accent on it, Teo Tohuaki, or whatever. And that is the character, a little happy cartoon talking virus. But the name Theo Tohuaki is actually a pun on a kind of accelerationist apocalypse, you know, apocalypse culture, right-wing culture expression, the end of the world as we know it. And oh wait, what's that called? Not an anagram, but where you take the first letter.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be the language master here. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So Teotwaki is kind of internet chat room shorthand for the end of the world as we know it. And it's an expression used by doomsday preppers and accelerationists, or just in general. So the piece that the piece uh, was actually the fastest I've ever originated an idea, wrote a script for it, created the character for it, did the animation, everything. Because I only just started working on that since March. And it was intended not just to be a one-shot. It differs from the Avatar Poetic series, each of which is different and just kind of based on my my whims at the whatever moment I'm sitting down in front of the computer. But this is my first character-driven episodic series of pieces. I've already created 2 chapters. The first one of which will be debuting at Supernova. Chapter 2 is still kind of in post-production. It's much longer, and I still am having kind of a hard time dealing with the idea of kind of bridging, kind of like creating a consistency from episode to episode outside of just the character. But also that's kind of the point. Every different chapter is going to look different and have a different feel. And Theo himself will have a slightly different personality. In this opening chapters, he kind of starts out as a kind of motivational speaker. But as the series progresses, he gets more and more kind of, deranged or nihilistic, or each chapter will kind of have a different personality and a different environment. And and the idea was something that I needed to do, that I just sat down and started writing. And my writing process actually starts with reading a lot of other sources and kind of pulling material from those sources, from my older writings, and whatever things are sitting around in my notebook that I can stitch together. And the whole series was kind of, like I said, not to romanticize this crisis, but as an artist, I felt like the only way that I could deal with it, honestly, was to look at the kind of mytho-historic or mytho-cultural aspect of the coronavirus. And this was inspired by certain readings I've done from Joseph Campbell, from Susan Sontag, who wrote a couple of very influential essays called Illness as Metaphor, and her follow-up essay, AIDS and Its Metaphors, in which she talks about the societal impulse to kind of mythologize these epidemics and these diseases. And as David Wojnarowicz wrote in the middle of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, when he was diagnosed, he wrote a lot of very powerful work related to that. But one line that's always stuck out to me was, as a queer man, as an artist, as someone living in the 80s with HIV and later AIDS, he said, "It did not take me long after I received my diagnosis to realize that I had contracted a diseased society as well." Mm. And so while on the one hand, we look at the abstract mythological or the kind of larger impact in society and how this changes us and our relationship to nature and certain big questions, we also have to deal with the very realities of how this disease and this pandemic and then the protests with Black Lives Matter have forced us to contend with the realities of society and disenfranchised people in a very real way, in the ways of like lives on the street. So I was sensitive to create a cute character that was based on visuals that we were seeing in the media of the coronavirus, all this electron microscopic imagery of viruses and inner worlds. And, essentially the media abstracted the face of this disease. Can you think of one image that resonates, one iconic image from the media of someone actually suffering from the disease? The problem, I think, with why, and the idea that we're even in a reality where people think that wearing masks is fake and that the disease is fake is unreal to me,
Yeah.
even when their own communities are getting hit by it. But from a visual perspective, putting on like a critic cap of, kind of like visual literacy and everything, the media has also done a lot to abstract the face of this crisis as well. For like the first month, all we saw was these kind of very seductive imagery of, kind of these images of, cartoon cells. This is the cartoon virus, a little animated explainers, or images from microbiology of these false colored, kind of like forms and scales. Like from an art perspective, if you're used to looking at art, these are very seductive and kind of aesthetic images. They're not images of danger. They're not images of poison, of warning, So the images and so the kind of environment.
No blood.
Yeah. No like no wasted faces.
Yeah.
No close-up shots of someone who's intubated in a coma, who've had their legs cut off, like all of the weird symptoms of this disease, and the fact that, not only the immediate symptoms, but also the ones that people are going to have to live with for years. So point is that I was very sensitive to create a cute cartoon character, which seemed to, based on the coronavirus image, which we had been, seen in the media over and over again. And not only that, but that this character seemed to be delivering philosophical monologues, on life and nature and death, basically like, essays, like, but, kind of like what Sontag did, but in my style, kind of more abstract, more absurdist. Like I said, the personality of this character is not, I have to strike a balance with these avatar characters, because none of them are meant to inhabit the real world, even the other characters that I created. Like with Max Headroom, again, this is a character born entirely within this kind of virtual space. And so I try to create these characters thinking that they don't necessarily have human senses. They don't know what it's actually like to be in the real world. And I think a lot of 3D animation, or, pieces of these characters kind of don't consider the ontology of characters that are born entirely in these environments with their own senses. There's no guarantee that an AI or a simulated entity that's as smart as a human or smarter than a human will resemble anything at all, like a human, or have human sensibilities. And that was the kind of genius of Max Headroom, and that's why I keep going back to it, was because he was a kind of ventriloquist puppet and a stand-up comedian, kind of revealing the repressed of society, because he didn't have to be sensitive about, the things that he was saying or the reality that he was occupying. So ultimately, I decided to abandon my sensibilities and make Teotihuacan, because as an artist, ultimately, I'm responsible for my own voice. And what I was doing with this series was not critiquing the world so much as I was doing it to heal myself.
Sean, man, I got to say that if I never do another interview again, this will be the be all end all. Honestly, thank you for sharing all of this. Wow. This really frames what we're doing this year in such a great way. I'm really pleased to have your work in Supernova in both these capacities. And I really hope that more people around the world are going to join us in both watching and understanding what your work and all the works are about. The World on Fire program, to me, has become this this thing that I never really would have imagined, and that's part of the joy of watching watching submissions come in, see who's paying attention, see who's doing what, and really being able to create, I think, an important stamp right now. And your stamp upon that is something that I think is really going to be felt.
I look forward to seeing all the other work. I'm sure there's lots of artists out there dealing with this in different ways, in explicit ways, in abstract ways, you know, kind of finding the poetry in this tragedy, but also kind of documenting the reality of it and the experience of it. So I think the time, yeah, so the timing of the festival and what you've put together for it, I'm really looking forward to seeing, experiencing everybody's else's voice in this time, this period of extreme retreat and interiority. If
Sure.
that's a word.
We,
Yeah.
we have an unbelievable slate of works to unleash next month. So I just
Cannot wait.
thank you for being a part of that and for inspiring me since we've intersected, and I'm sure that's going to continue. So do you have any last thoughts? I'm like I want to make sure that I get this whole recording because it's just great.
No, I think that was a great place to wrap it up. I think I've said all that needs to be said. And I just, you know, don't want to build up too much expectations on the work. We just need to let it speak for itself from this point.
Absolutely. And speak it will. And thanks again, Sean. It's just great to see you.
Okay. Follow me on social media.
Follow Sean and Supernova and Denver Digerati and all the artists on social media. We'll see you soon, Sean.
All right. Bye.
Okay.